As far as villains go, Sephiroth has always been one of my favourites, and not only in the Final Fantasy franchise, but just in video gaming as a whole. I actually really love the way in the original game, before you meet Sephiroth in person, there's a huge build-up as to his character, the legendary status of who Sephiroth actually is, and you get that from other characters and other parts of the game before, as I say, you actually see Sephiroth in the skin for the first time, which is of course during the Nibelheim flashback. And then during that flashback, you get to experience just how powerful Sephiroth actually is, as he single-handedly dispatches and takes care of these powerful monsters, all the while not even getting bruised himself. Of course, in the original game, everything is building up throughout the whole adventure towards that final showdown between Cloud and the party and Sephiroth himself. But having played through Final Fantasy VII more times than I can count, I pretty much know the game back to front and inside out and every other which way at this point, which means surprises are now few and far between. Enter New Threat 2.0, the popular gameplay mod by Sega Chief, and I've been really enjoying this playthrough, and today we are focusing of course on Sephiroth, and I really wasn't expecting this, but it is a change that kind of makes sense, and I've got to say I like it. So in the original Final Fantasy VII, you would be chasing Sephiroth, of course, around the world, or what you thought was Sephiroth's body, but turned out to be Sephiroth controlling a bunch of Jenova cells that he had transformed into his image. And sometimes these encounters would lead to boss battles where Sephiroth shapeshifts these Jenova cells into a scary amalgamation that the party must then defeat. However, this new edition with New Threat 2.0 actually has the party battling the Sephiroth-shaped form of the Jenova cells before it transforms into the original boss form that we are familiar with. And I have to say, I really like this change. I find that it is very effective and it makes the boss battle feel more natural in its progression, but I want to know what you guys think of this. I'm going to show you the fight now. It's a two-phase fight. It's not easy, okay? It does take a little bit of work, so I will explain my strategy as we go through. But I hope you guys enjoy the battle, and here we go. This is the Jenova Death fight in New Threat 2.0. I've got to say, just as we get started here, that this mod, as a technical achievement alone, it's just phenomenal. It really is. These aren't lazy implementations of new bosses or what have you, like perhaps you might get with the Game Shark codes back in the day. This is full-on editing of the game files in a way that I just wouldn't even know where to begin with, to tell you the truth. But the finished result is just spectacular. So this first phase of the encounter then, which is against Sephiroth's form, is obviously something that doesn't play out in the original, and it's not the most difficult part of the fight. I think it's here mainly for the cool factor than anything else. But Sephiroth does have a number of moves up his arsenal, quite a lot of different abilities in fact, so it is important just to stay on top of healing here. And he also has some nasty status effects, though in my experience, I've done this fight a few times, he tends to cast those quite rarely. Now, some of his other abilities you will actually recognise from the original fight at the end of the game against Sephiroth, such as Pale Horse and what have you. Now, I would recommend stealing from this particular boss, from this phase of this boss, because you can get a gem ring, and once phase 2 begins, and we're actually battling against Jenova Death, then a new steal will be available. You can get both of them, but you do need to get one in each phase. Also, Magic Breath seems particularly effective here, I noticed, so when you want to finish this fight off, just cast that a couple of times and you'll probably be done. Here comes the Heartless Angel, also, I believe, from the original Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII, and as before, it does reduce a party member's HP to 1, so just be ready with a Cure 3 at that point. And once the HP of this first phase boss has been defeated, Sephiroth will transform into Jenova Death. And this part of the encounter is a slog, okay? It is a grind. Jenova Death has 40,000 HP, which is no insignificant amount. However, on top of that, Jenova Death is immune to gravity effects, so there's no cheese in this, has insanely high defenses and magical defenses. In fact, even my strongest physical attacker here would do about 15 points of damage with a standard physical hit compared to about 1,000 on a normal enemy. And many of your abilities, magic spells, are just not going to be doing much in terms of damage. In fact, when we finally sensed this boss, and I didn't rush to do that because I knew the encounter was going to be long anyway, I wanted to get the steal and that done. But when we finally sense this boss, we are told that it is weak to gravity. However, even Quake 2 does so little damage because of those high magical defenses. Which means you don't want to rush this one, okay? You're not going to be killing it quickly anyway. Jenova Death is going to be a long fight, so focus more on the defensive side of things rather than the offensive side. It's also worth noting as well that every time you do 10,000 HP of damage to Jenova Death, it will counter with some nasty ability. So when it gets to 30,000 HP, 20,000 and then 10,000 HP, just make sure you are, or rather that you are at full health as a party before inflicting the damage that will make Jenova Death fall below that threshold. Now, one of the things that's going to make or break this fight is protection against death. Jenova Death, hence the name, has multiple abilities that can inflict death on your party. And if you don't guard against it on every party member, you're just going to be spending much of the encounter just using Phoenix Downs and that and bringing party members back to life. So go ahead and equip. I think it's the safety bit if you have it. I actually forgot to do so for this fight. But the other thing you can use is Death Force. It's an enemy skill. We learned it earlier on. And the good thing about Death Force, it not only guards against death, but it will last throughout the entire encounter once it's been cast on a party member, unless that party member dies, in which case you would have to cast it again. But if you can get Death Force active on every party member, then Jenova Death will no longer use any of its death abilities. With the straight up death effects out of the equation, all we're now going to have to focus on really is healing through the other vast amount of damage that is going to be coming our way. Now, one ability that Jenova Death has is called Red Light, and if your party members are unprotected, without magic barrier in other words, it's going to do about 1,800 points of damage on a single party member. And if that's not bad enough, Jenova Death will always cast this on every party member in one single turn, so casts it 3 times, which is just going to be completely destructive. It also has other abilities, including Iron Summon, which can be cast a couple of times. In fact, one of the things that Jenova Death does, which is really annoying, is have multiple attacks per turn most of the time. One thing that I found super helpful in this encounter was Aerith's Planet Protector Limit Break. Now, normally in these sorts of boss fights, I like to have a nice healing Limit Break from Aerith, and Planet Protector doesn't have a straight up healing effect. It does cast regen, but what it also does is cast Magic Barrier, and that is just invaluable. It really is. Halving pretty much all of the damage that Jenova Death is going to do is just very, very useful indeed. And having that regen effect combined with that, it's basically the big guard of New Threat 2.0 is Planet Protector. And even with Magic Barrier, you are still going to be taking quite a bit of damage. So Aerith's limit should hopefully be filled up again, not too long after the effects of Planet Protector wear off, so that you can pretty much keep it up, not 100% of the time, but much of the encounter at least. Now, if you're not using Aerith, or if you do not have Aerith's Planet Protector Limit Break, then of course you are just going to need to cast Magic Barrier manually, the spell itself, and it probably won't hurt if you can cast Regen as well. So that's the defensive side of the battle. Now, before we move on to the offensive side, I will just mention there is a Protect Ring on Jenova Death's steel table, and you can still get that even having stolen the Gem Ring from Phase 1, so make sure you do. And it takes me quite a few attempts to get it. It is quite a low chance of success, I believe, to steal the Protect Ring, so that's pretty much what Tifa is resigned to throughout the majority of this fight. Now, the other thing as well, I suppose this comes under defense, is that you are going to be burning through quite a lot of MP. So another role that Tifa fulfilled during this encounter was MP Restorer or MP Healer, and I would just have her casting Ethers, especially towards the end of the fight, as I'm just doing a lot more damage, casting a lot more spells against Jenova Death. Cloud and Aerith, who became my main damage dealers throughout the fight, very quickly were needing their MP replenished regularly, so Tifa was constantly throwing Ethers towards the latter half of the encounter. Okay, so in terms of damage then, because as I say, the defenses of this boss are crazy high. Physical attacks are just out of the question. Limit breaks, in terms of damaging limit breaks, are pretty much out of the question as well. There are 2 abilities, there's probably more, but there are 2 abilities that I found quite useful. They are Comet and Laser. Now, Laser in the original Final Fantasy VII was a gravity-based spell. And of course, as I mentioned, Jenova Death here is resistant to gravity, but Laser in New Threat 2.0 is not a gravity spell, it is a non-elemental spell. And it does a fair amount of damage, I think about 800 points of damage. Comet, when Cloud is casting it, does about 1200 points of damage. So all in all, with Cloud and Aerith, we are doing about 2000 points of damage per round. Now, of course, we are having to interrupt that regularly when I need to jump on healing or Ares needs to cast Planet Protector or whatever the case may be. But with Tifa, hopefully, you know, managing healing and MP restorative duty, you can get quite a few rounds out just with that amount of damage, about 2000. So having done 10,000 damage, we now get the first counter, the Tombury ability, Everyone's Grudge. And there's no question about it, that will one-shot any of your party members that doesn't have Magic Barrier currently active. I did, and as you can see, Cloud still took a whopping amount of damage there, but nothing that a Cure 3 couldn't heal through. So that was the first counter ability. I'm pretty sure that we handled that correctly. And I hadn't forgotten to sense Jenova Death until this point. I've just done it now. It was just a case of I knew there was no rush to sense when we were only going to have weakened it a little bit by that point anyway. Now with the Protect Ring stolen, and there's no morph from this boss by the way, it was just about getting into a routine that would keep us going now throughout the rest of the encounter. And my routine was pretty much as I explained to you from this point. Trying to keep Planet Protector buffs up as often as possible so that we don't have to spend all our time healing. Using Tifa instead to just pretty much spam ethers on my two damage dealers, Cloud and Aerith, and then use those two party members to inflict either Comet or Laser. And together, you know, 2000 HP per round. It's just about pushing this encounter through to the end, even though it takes a little bit of time. But just don't forget there are two more counters incoming at 20,000 and 10,000 HP. And it won't be Everyone's Grudge this time. It is a different ability on each turn. So just before you knock the boss down below each of those thresholds, make sure that you do have perhaps Magic Barrier or Planet Protector active and you're at relatively high HP with a party member ready to cure up if need be. Now, it's not essential, but I did cast Alexander here because the Judgment ability does do a fair bit of damage to Jenova. Unfortunately, I could only cast Alexander one time, so I couldn't build this into the routine. But like I say, not essential, but as a one-off bit of damage to get through a chunk of HP, it is particularly helpful. So from this point on, it's pretty much Cloud casts Comet, Ares casts either Laser or Planet Protector, and Tifa is either healing or throwing ethers around. So let's skip ahead now so that we can see the next counter. And this is not actually a damaging ability, so I did actually get a heal ready for this, but it wasn't needed. It's a buff for the boss itself, and kind of annoying. I'm not sure all of the buffs that are included with that counter ability, but it definitely does include Magic Barrier. Now, seeing as how our two damaging abilities, Comet and Laser, are both affected by Magic Barrier, that's just drawn the fight out even longer. Now, you can dispel Magic Barrier, but I didn't have anything to do that. If you do, go ahead and use it. I just decided to slog through it at half damage or whatever the reduction is and just carry on with my routine since it was working well. It effectively slowed me down, but that was pretty much all it did. Annoyingly, I think Jenova Death has the hack version of Magic Barrier with that counter ability because it seemed to last for flipping ages. It does wear out eventually, but it certainly lasted a lot longer than Magic Barrier lasts when I cast it on my party anyhow. And skipping ahead to that 10,000 HP mark, Jenova Death unleashed Meteor Rain as its counter ability, which sounded a lot scarier than it ended up being. With Planet Protector's Magic Barrier active and the regen to recover from it, it wasn't really a threat that I had to be concerned with. And at this point, I think I've pretty much exhausted everything I had to do in terms of strategy in order to beat this encounter. It was a lot of fun. It was a grind. Having Sephiroth appear in his form before, you know, morphing into Jenova was a really nice touch, as I mentioned. I was a big fan of that change. But yeah, just slog through and you will get there. One thing I would be very interested in knowing if you guys have also battled this version, this New Threat 2.0 version of Jenova Death, is any other abilities that you feel are worth using in terms of damage. So obviously I stuck to using Laser and Comet, but I did explore a few of the other abilities I had and enemy skills to no avail. If there's anything I've missed, then please do share those down below, along with the damage that those abilities you used actually did. But stick at it, folks, and I'm sure Jenova Death will be living up to its name as you plummet it back into the grave, at least temporarily anyway. So to finish off, I'm going to show you the cutscene that plays out after the defeat of this boss, since some of the dialogue has been changed from its original counterpart. I hope you guys enjoy that, and I appreciate you spending your time with me today. So thanks so much for stopping by, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.